Alright, man, peace. Brothers, I have to admit that for a while I struggled with whether or not I even wanted to make this video. Because this segment and the debate that Shannon Sharpe and Skip Bayless have in this segment is so long. And as usual, whenever they debate on a subject like this, they have to digress into LeBron James and Michael Jordan and all these other things. But I did think that even though I know what Skip Bayless's true motivation is, he brings up a relatively good point. This segment is about whether or not the comeback led by Kawhi Leonard, where the LA Clippers were able to overcome a 2-0 deficit to the Dallas Mavericks, should be considered the greatest comeback in the history of the NBA playoffs. Do I necessarily agree with Skip Bayless that it was? No, not necessarily. There have been other great comebacks from down 3-1 or down 2-0. But he makes a lot of valid points for this one, especially when you consider a lot of the psychological baggage that the Clippers still had heading into this 2021 postseason from 2020, when they themselves gave up a 3-1 lead. So anyway, they're going to talk about it. I'm going to chime in.
Guys, the Clippers became just the 5th team in NBA history to come back and win a series after losing the first 2 games at home. The Clippers also had to come back down 3-2 after dropping Game 5 at home as well.
Let me say this also very quickly. The Clippers lost the first 2 games against the Dallas Mavericks, and it was nothing like the first 2 games that they lost to the Phoenix Suns or to the Utah Jazz. Like, they looked like they were not anywhere near as good a team as the Dallas Mavericks. They looked like they had no idea how to defend Luka Doncic, and it seemed like they were going to head out to Dallas and get swept. So once again, I can kind of sort of see Skip Bayless's argument for the notion that Kawhi Leonard led the greatest comeback in the history of the NBA playoffs. Like, there's a little bit to it.
Game 7 yesterday, Kawhi led the Clippers to victory with 28 points and just an assist shy.
You see that right there? Even when Kawhi Leonard lands, and of course this was before he hurt his knee against the Utah Jazz, but even when he lands here, he always lands very awkwardly. He's obviously a tremendous athlete, but every athlete can learn, especially their own body, and how to get better. That's why I'm always an advocate of, so many of these top shelf performers trying to diversify not only their skill set, but their knowledge base. Go out there and hire an Olympic track and field coach. Go out there and hire, who knows, maybe a gymnastics coach, someone who could teach you about your body, Pilates, so on and so forth. And a lot of these guys are already doing that. But to me, it's very obvious that 2 players in particular, Kawhi Leonard and Joel Embiid, they need some coaching on something other than just, training, conditioning, as well as basketball. They need someone who can help them with their body, kinesiology or whatever the appropriate term might be. But, there's something going on with their body mechanics that they're always getting hurt like this.
So Shannon, gotta ask the question, was this comeback the greatest in NBA history?
No, I'm not going to call it the greatest in NBA history, but it's close. I do think that other comebacks are highly overrated. I've always stated that the Cleveland Cavaliers coming back from down 3-1 is most likely the most overrated quote-unquote comeback in the history of professional basketball, maybe even professional sports. There's no way in the world that you're going to tell me that the Cleveland Cavaliers should have been an underdog to the Golden State Warriors if you have supposedly the greatest player in the history of basketball and a super team that was favored to win the championship before that season started, despite the fact that they lost to Golden State the season before. Even Michael Jordan said that was not shocking that the Cleveland Cavaliers beat the Golden State Warriors. It was not an upset. He said that in the aftermath. He said the Cavaliers were the better team. You look at the roster of the 2016 Cavaliers and compare it to the roster of the 2016 Warriors. It's amazing to me that the Warriors won 73 games that regular season and the Cavaliers only won, 51 or 55? How many games they won that year in the regular season? The real question is, why did the Cavaliers underperform to such a high degree that regular season? They head into the finals against the Warriors, and LeBron James is going up against Harrison Barnes. And you guys are down 3-1? Makes no sense whatsoever. That's why it was so pivotal when Draymond Green went down, or I should say when he was removed from the series and suspended 1 game for the altercation that LeBron James started for Game 5. I mean, Game 5 was pivotal. Whether you're tied 2-2 or up 3-1, Game 5 is pivotal. Because even if you're up 3-1, if you lose game 5 at home, now you have to go back on the road to finish off the series. And if you lose that game, suddenly you have one game for it all, game 7, which is what Golden State eventually was confronted with. And anything can happen in a game 7. But it's going to take me a while to think about what the greatest comeback ever actually was. But I've never thought that it was Cleveland against Golden State. That's just the most hyped one because the media, they have this agenda to promote LeBron James as the greatest player of all time. But there have definitely been some other comebacks, like possibly the Rockets against the Phoenix Suns when the Rockets were down 3-1 against them. I mean, that comeback was incredible.
Oh, it's not even top 5. Skip, you know this. I mean, did we forget what the Cavaliers did to the Warriors in 2016?
Nope.
That was a 3-1. That was a 73-19. Do we remember what the Warriors did to OKC in the same playoffs?
That was a great comeback. As a matter of fact, the Warriors' comeback against the OKC Thunder was far greater to me than the Cavaliers' comeback against the Warriors. Because the OKC Thunder actually had more talent than the Golden State Warriors had. Physically, they were just dominant over the Warriors. And when they got them down 3-1, Golden State looked like they were finished mentally. But kudos to them, they were able to galvanize themselves and figure out how to defeat the OKC Thunder. And that game 6 is one of the greatest games I've ever seen because I did not know how the Warriors were going to be able to win a game in Oklahoma City down 3-2. And they didn't have to get Russell Westbrook suspended or Kevin Durant suspended to win that game. They won it fair and square.
The Houston Rockets come down from 3-1 to Phoenix, Skip. No, Boston Celtics come back from 3-1 against the Celtics. Boston came back 3-1 against the Sixers in 81.
That was a tremendous comeback. I think that Bill Russell also had a 3-1 comeback as well back in the 60s.
Top 5, I get it. It was great. It was great for the Clipper fans considering their history in Game 7s.
I will say this, though, and we have to understand this. The Clippers were not only down 2-0 against a foe that had come into their building, beat them twice, and had their best player look indomitable, but they were down 30-11 in Game 3 in Dallas. Like one could say they were almost down 2.5 games to nothing. And they were able to lead a comeback there. Like, it was just like, wow.
How many they had lost and what happened last year. But I get all of that. But Skip, this is not a top five moment in NBA history as far as comebacks. I remember the Nuggets came back again.
Well, a lot of how we view things is based on our perception. So if the media were to hype this comeback up more, then it would get more credit. They hype up the Cleveland Cavaliers coming back against the Golden State Warriors like no comeback I've ever seen. And I understand the selling points. Golden State was 73-9 and all this other stuff. But once again, if you have supposedly the greatest player of all time, certainly the player who everyone deems to be the best player of his generation, number one, why is he down 3-1 in the first place? Number two, why is it a surprise that he's able to lead a team that has other great players on it back from down 3-1 when the opposition lost his most important defensive component in Draymond Green?
Who won 63 games that year? It was the best, if I'm not mistaken, it was the best of 5. And they were down 0-2 and they won 3 straight.
Shannon's talking about when the Supersonics gave up that 2-0 lead to the Denver Nuggets in '94. You know, that classic series where Denver wins Game 5 in Seattle, and they show that snippet of Dikembe Mutombo on the ground holding the basketball. That's what he's referring to.
Skip, it's not even close. Not even close. Not even close. You can't even make that argument in good conscience.
I got a real good conscience right now because I'm a argument and win that argument. And by the way, the architect of the 2 greatest comebacks, yours in 2016 and this one here, was the same guy, Ty Lue, right?
Yep.
People are starting to understand how great a coach Ty Lue really is. And it's very important because it's going to alter this fictitious LeBron James narrative that he's never had a great coach. I've always stated this guy's had plenty of great coaches. It's just that he's not loyal enough to a franchise. Not that he needs to be, but he's not loyal enough to a particular franchise to allow one in particular coach to get a lot of the credit. LeBron loves that his narrative is going to show that he was able to win championships with at least 3 different coaches because it's going to make him look like the genius.
to me. And by the way, after all the ridicule about, well, Doc Rivers, was he the scapegoat? Well, maybe it was a good change to go to Ty Lue. Maybe.
Absolutely, I always stated that it was. Doc Rivers, very overrated as a head coach. He's had great talent in multiple locations and has always underperformed. He only has one championship in his career as a coach, the 2008 Celtics, and they went to multiple 7-game series in that playoff season. When you have Ray Allen, Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce, Rajon Rondo all on the same team, you're not supposed to go 7 with anybody. Anybody. So there's something missing there with Doc Rivers. He has a lot of the persona, but something tells me that he's missing certain things when it comes to the X's and O's and to the adjustments.
To the locker room.
But Skip, you got to admit, Kawhi played like this game 6 or 7 last year.
Okay.
Great point. You need your superstars to show up when you need them. And he definitely has shown up in the playoffs, at least before he got injured.
It's a new motivation. Is Ty Lue actually the playoff Rondo that I thought playoff Rondo would be? Is it Ty Lue's leadership that got them home?
It's definitely Ty Lue's leadership, and he knows how to utilize all the pieces that they have. The Clippers have so much talent. They're actually able to create facsimiles of some of the great players that they lose by plug and play. So you can put in a Terrence Mann and he can almost make up for what you lose with a Kawhi Leonard, especially in this era of basketball where it's so open. A lot of the movement is so open. You can lose a superstar, and if you have someone coming off the bench who's very talented, you can put them in positions where they can get you 18 to 22 points. And it's not going to be Kawhi's 33 points or 34 points. But if you can make up the difference from other players, it can almost seem like you're not missing that player anymore. Now, one of the Morris twins, Marcus Morris, has gone down. Kawhi has gone down. So this really is becoming a war of attrition for the Clippers. Are they going to have enough to get to the finish line? We'll find out.
Nights, and again, Ty Lue kept saying exactly the right thing at every juncture in this series, because he kept saying, look, I've been an underdog all my life. Remember, we were kind of getting on him a little bit for that there's no desperation, where there's no urgency, we're not panicking. Well, they didn't.
I've always said about Ty Lue, his coaching style reminds me a lot of Floyd Mayweather's boxing style. The first 2 or 3 rounds, Floyd is trying to calculate exactly what you do. What are the trajectories of your punches? How hard do you throw? Your feints? What are you trying to accomplish from your feints and your fakes? How good is your footwork? He's going to test you to the body to see how you respond. What's your conditioning like? He wants to find all these things out so that by rounds 3 or 4, he can start to initiate his own game plan. Ty Lue's the same way. And you could be that way when you know that you have the abundance of talent on your team. So there's no real rush to believe that we have to win the first 2 games or one of the first 2 games. We have time as long as we adopt the appropriate game plan once we receive all of our data. So he's great at that.
Here's why this was the greatest comeback, unless you want to redefine it as the most unlikely comeback ever, the most improbable, the most impossible comeback ever, because you have to use your favorite word, context.
Okay.
Absolutely.
They came off a series last year in the bubble in which they had Denver dead to rights down 3-1. They failed to close 3 straight closeout games in which they led by 19 and 14 and 12 points. So they had that hanging over their psyches going into this playoff run.
Let's also remember, they almost blew the series to the Mavericks in the bubble last year. So one could say, they very easily could have quit and said to themselves, this guy Luka's too much. He's grown from last season. We're having post-traumatic stress disorder syndrome kick in from what happened last year. And we're probably just not going to make it. But due to the fact that they had a new voice in the locker room, man, that's why it's great to have an intelligent boss who knows how to remove certain pieces and bring in other pieces. Because if Doc Rivers was still that coach, they would have lost to the Mavericks. No doubt about it.
And what do? They are heavily favored to win Game 1 and Game 2 at Staples.
Okay.
And what do? They just upchuck all over the floor. They are pathetic. They look like what Clippers are notoriously supposed to look like, a disaster. So Again, they're down 0-2 going to Dallas because Dallas had made 35 of 70 3-point shots. And Dallas goes home and makes 20 more, 20 of 39. So they're way above 50% for the series.
Right.
And what happens? They're up 30-11.
The Mavericks' three-point shooting in the first 2.5 games might have been the greatest that I've ever seen from a team. Like, they were making shots at such an incredible clip. But kudos to Ty Lue because he always said they were going to return to their average. They're going to come back down to their mean, and they did over the course of the series. Also, in addition to the fact the Clippers started to play better defense, and eventually down the stretch of the series, Kawhi Leonard took up the challenge of guarding Luka Doncic. And it wasn't like Luka got shut down, but in Game 6, they shut him down enough to win a very pivotal game. And that Game 6 by Kawhi Leonard is one of the greatest games I've ever seen played. The 2021 playoffs, I've already mentioned this, have had a bevy of the greatest games played by individual players who are still in their prime. In my view, Kawhi Leonard, Kevin Durant, Trae Young, Devin Booker have all had the greatest games of their careers in these playoffs. CP3 had the best series of his career against the Denver Nuggets in the second round.
3 at Dallas on a Friday night before a sellout throng that is crazed.
Right.
Featuring Dak Prescott in the first row and Michael Irvin up in one of the boxes. That crowd was on fire because the Mavericks were on fire. If I had called you at 30-11 Dallas, you would have been laughing at me because you'd have said this thing is way over.
No doubt about it.
Over, am I right?
Not the first quarter.
Yes, you would have. You would have because
the first quarters
they show no signs of life. They're on the road against that team that have been very good at home this year.
Well, I saw LeBron come back. I saw LeBron come back from 73-49 at the half.
Think of what these are. These are the Clippers,
right.
The ugly stepchildren in the basement at Staples. And now, at that point, they had lost 5 straight playoff games that they were supposed to win. They'd been favored 5 straight times, 3 against Denver and 2 against the Dallas Mavericks, and they had just gagged and choked all over the floor 5 straight times. And they had history weighing on their heads. And they're down 30-11, and I still don't know how they won Game 3.
Can I ask you a question?
The reason why they won Game 3 is because Rick Carlisle got arrogant and took out Luka Doncic. He thought that the Clippers were about to quit. And when they took out Luka Doncic, he gave the Clippers a little bit of daylight. And it was one of the rare moments in the playoffs that we've seen Rajon Rondo actually have an impact and play well. The Clippers were able to close the lead, and from there, the talent took over. The talent disparity took over because the Clippers have way more team talent from top to bottom than the Mavericks. Now, if we were going to evaluate the best players involved in the series, one can certainly make the case that Luka is the best overall player. I would disagree with that. I would say Kawhi, that you'd have to pick Kawhi because of his resume. But if someone were to choose Luka, I could understand it. But pretty much like the next 4 or 5 players after that, is all going to be Clippers, Clippers, Clippers.
Team come back from 0-2 in the playoffs.
Well, sure, but not under these circumstances, not with the history of being the Clippers.
You know when Portland came back from 0-2 in the finals against the Sixers.
You're disallowing what I just told you.
And on top of that, it's very rare that you see a team come back from down 3-1 or down 0-2 after having lost the first 2 home games. That to me is the major difference. I'm not quite sure if the Celtics lost their first 2 games at home in '81. But I know for a fact that the Rockets lost their first 2 games at home against the Phoenix Suns, I believe, in '95. That's why I believe that that's probably the greatest comeback of all time, if we really want to go there, for a team down 3-1 to lose your first 2 games at home and then win the series. Like, that was incredible. As a matter of fact, did the Rockets fall down 3-1 to the Phoenix Suns 2 years in a row? Because I know in '95. They won the series in Game 7 in Phoenix when Mario Elliott hit that 3-pointer from the corner and gave him the kiss of death. I'm trying to remember which year it was that they were down 3-1. I think it was '94 that they were down 3-1 because that's the year that they would have lost the first 2 games at home because they had home court advantage. They were the number 1 seed in the West, if I remember correctly. Or maybe it was the Seattle Supersonics who were number 1 because they lost to the Denver Nuggets in the first round. Either way, in my view, the greatest 3-1 comeback ever in the history of the NBA, at least the modern history, were the Rockets when they came back and defeated the Suns. And, you know, I saw an argument that inside the NBA panel that they were having. And basically Kenny Smith was trying to argue that the team with the best player doesn't always win, that there are a lot of other components that go into it. Well, there are a lot of other components that go into winning, but in the NBA, normally the teams with the best players win. Because Kenny even brought up how they were down 2-0 to the Phoenix Suns, but I think that Kenny forgets that Hakeem was better than Charles. There were not many players who were better than Charles Barkley in the early 90s. Hakeem was one of them.
On 3 straight closeout games against Denver in the previous fall.
I thought Ty Lue said this was a different team. You say they got a different voice in it.
Well, they sure didn't look like a different team after the first 2 games and after the first quarter of game number 3, right?
I don't think under any circumstances will someone says coming back from 0-2 is better than coming back from 3-1. And you're doing it.
It depends on who you're playing and what the situation is. I think that coming back from down 0-2 when you lost your first 2 games at home could be considered greater than coming back from down 3-1 if you lost the first 2 games on the road. But it depends on the situation and the scenario.
19. And remind you, when the Warriors came back, they came back against KD and Russ.
Okay, so that night, game 3 at Dallas, the Clippers got outscored by 21 points from the 3-point line. What usually happens when that happens?
Yeah.
You just lose.
Right.
And somehow they chipped away and came back, and I don't know how they did it, but Kawhi was spectacular. Paul George was spectacular.
Well, that's how they did it, Skip Bayless. How you going to say you don't know how they did it and you just say Kawhi and Paul George were spectacular? Kawhi was incredible in that Dallas Mavericks series, pretty much from game 3 to game 7. He did have one hiccup, I believe in game 5, where he didn't shoot well. And Luka, went out there and did his thing. But game 6 is the best I've ever seen Kawhi play. In game 7, he was phenomenal.
Role players, because they're the deepest team in the league, started to click.
Right.
And Marcus Morris made 3 huge threes, and all of a sudden they somehow survived game 3.
I'm still upset that we're not going to see Clippers versus Nets in the finals, man. That would have been one of the greatest finals ever. With all the talent on both teams, oh my God.
In game 4, in the only blowout in the series, and then help me out. What happened when they came home for game 5 when they were in control?
Right.
And the whole NBA world said, okay, you got this.
Right.
They don't got this.
Let's give that.
Okay, Kawhi stunk up the 4th quarter of game 5, right?
Yeah.
And how does game 5 end? With a Kawhi air ball from the corner to tie. He shoots an air ball, and Rondo shot right up to him and got in his face about it. And
See, the thing about Rondo is Rondo thinks that his leadership style works for everyone. Number one, you can only be confrontational like that if you're playing high-level basketball yourself. Like LeBron, you can kind of sort of deal with LeBron like that if he respects your pedigree. LeBron respects Rajon Rondo's pedigree. I don't think that Kawhi respects anybody's pedigree. I don't think that he cares about any person's opinion about him. So when you try to confront him in that way and yell and carry on, it's pretty much like talking to a wall. Because Kawhi is so self-motivated and self-galvanized, he doesn't need you to yell at him. That's not the approach to take with Kawhi. You have to be able to communicate with Kawhi because everything that he does is based on, his own inspiration, his own, he provides his own impetus.
And it looked like they had dissension in the ranks, right?
Well, Skip, it's hard for me. When you're down 3-1 to the defending champs, and you got game 5 in their building, and you get 2 guys go for 41, Kyrie and LeBron, and then you come back game 6, and LeBron does it again, and then game 7, the greatest defensive player in NBA history, would you?
No, sir. But I'll be talking about that in another video. The so-called greatest defensive play in NBA history is definitely not that. It's not even the greatest defensive play in finals history. It's not the greatest defensive play in a closeout game's history. But once again, I'll be discussing that in the video that I do to cover that topic.
Can you got that?
No, that was the bicycle.
No,
that was J.R. Smith started that.
Don't do that, Skip. Yeah. Do we have that play?
Yeah,
the greatest defensive play.
Watch J.R. J.R. did it first. J.R. got there first.
Where did he come from? Skip, where did he come from?
Off for the pass. He was going to dunk it, and at the last second, because J.R.
Look, don't get it twisted. That was a great play by LeBron, but, to Skip Bayless's point, that's a LeBron chase down block 101. where another defender does a lot of the work. It's almost like a safety who gets an interception because the cornerback was able to run the receiver off of his route. The quarterback threw the football where he thought the receiver was going to be or where he was supposed to be. But because of the cornerback's, stellar defense, the safety was able to get the easy interception. That was an easy block by LeBron. Did he show great athleticism there? Was he able to track down the play? Sure. But Iguodala was diverted by by J.R. Smith, to Skip Bayless's point, the bicycle built for two.
Had to go up and under, and LeBron had time to catch up. Way to go. LeBron got the assist on it. He actually got the cleanup.
What you call about to call and one? Iggy said and one and nothing.
Greatest defensive play ever.
Greatest.
It was a straight up ambush.
Greatest
ambush.
Skip.
Came from no.
I'm not even sure if Iggy would have made that layup had it not been blocked. He might have missed that layup.
After JR had cut him off.
This is not a top 5 comeback in NBA. Okay, the first round. Okay, first one is the first round.
Okay, I'm going to fin.
Well, you also have to factor in the psychological aspect. And to Skip Bayless's point, where the Clippers have come from, what their pedigree is, like what their resume is. They're known for coming in second or last. So this was almost like, like how a lot of black people today, they like to use this phrase, breaking generational curses. The Clippers pretty much broke a generational curse when they were able to come back from down 2-0 after losing the first 2 games at home. And it's like this playoffs has been a series of breaking generational curses for the Clippers. It's been very cathartic for them, even if they don't win the championship. It's like the end of Rocky 1, where he lost the fight, but because he was able to last the whole bout, he quote-unquote won.
So they lose Game 5 at home, and they are in the deepest hole because they have to go back to Dallas for Game 6. And I thought they were going to lose it. And guess what, ladies and gentlemen? They're down 4 going to the 4th quarter at Dallas, and they are cooked again. And what happened? Kawhi Leonard happened. He went 5 for 5 in the 4th quarter, 2 of 2 from 3. Scored 12 points, and by the way, Paul George scored 8 more points, and they won the 4th quarter 31-20. That's impossible.
Think about this, Skip. You say they're going back for Game 6. They had just beat them. In Games 3 and 4 in Dallas. So how improbable would it have been for them to win Game 6?
Well, then,
right, but still, that was a closeout situation, Shannon Sharp. Someone would have to ask, after you go down 3-2, you lose a pivotal Game 5 at home. You were down at one point in Game 3, 30-11. What happens in Game 6 if you allow them to get out to a big lead again? What are the chances that you can come back again, especially with Rick Carlisle understanding that he's going to have to change the system or the protocol that he normally uses to rest Luka? He's not going to make the same mistake again. So either way, you don't want to go back to Dallas down 3-2 and just leaning on the fact that we won Games 3 and 4 there. Of course, you know that you have the best player in the series, Kawhi Leonard. But still, you don't want to be bothered with that.
Was it to come back home where they blow Game 7s like clockwork?
Right.
And they come in yesterday, and Luka is hot from the start, and so is Tim Hardaway.
Luka was incredible the whole series, man. Like, other than Game 6, this dude was on one the whole series. It was like, wow.
Or call him Steph Hardaway because he looked like Steph Hardaway. And all of a sudden, they get down 5 early in the 3rd quarter, and they go on a 30-6 run. When they were down 5, I thought they were cooked again. They kept digging themselves out of hole after hole after hole against the greatest score. You've already made the case. No one has scored like this, the way Luka's scoring.
No.
Okay? So it took all...
Well, if you're talking about no one scoring like that, I mean, the record for highest point per game average in the series is Michael Jordan, 45.3 points per game. So let's not say no one has scored like this.
Guts and gumption and grit and backbone and heart and soul. It took it. They kept climbing out of holes because they're the Clippers. Again, the expectations were they were favored in every game, so they're expected to win, but they're also expected to collapse because they have a history of collapse. They have a history of being the second team in LA, the other team, right?
And those are all valid points. Everyone does not start from the same starting point. So their ability to accomplish the mission has to be evaluated based on where they started from, not based on the fact that they all crossed the same finish line.
With Kawhi, they was down 0-2 with an MVP. and they won 4 straight in the Eastern Conference Semis.
Where did they lose the 2? On the road.
Yes.
Yes. These guys lost the first 2 at home.
Absolutely. And that was a great comeback from down 0-2 because the Raptors were also a team that needed to have certain demons expunged. So Kawhi Leonard has been involved with a lot of those type of things because he doesn't allow the demons or the spirits that people suffer from or that they tolerate in their environment to infect him. So that's why he's great in those type of roles where he just comes in and he's like the cleanser almost.
Straight.
Okay, let's look at what happened in that fateful series when the Golden State Warriors were up 3-1 in 2016.
Yeah, what happened?
Your LeBron's. Draymond Green got suspended for Game 5. So don't give me it was full strength because he was the guts and the glue of that team. He was their enforcer, and he was trying to enforce so strongly that he got into it with LeBron James and yelled out as loud as he could yell, called him the B word. And Kiki Vandeweghe, who ran the discipline program for the NBA, heard it in the second row. And
that was an abomination, though. There's nowhere in the world that you can suspend Draymond Green for calling LeBron James a bitch and flailing at him after LeBron stepped over him. Just in and of itself, you cannot suspend Draymond for that. Now, I understand this is an idiot with a record. I get all that. Draymond is an idiot, and he did have a record, an extensive one, in those 2016 playoffs. But for the sake of competition, you can't suspend him for Game 5 over that. That was just nonsense.
it's enough because there'd been a kicking incident already in the previous round.
But Draymond had a history of kicking people.
Okay, he did.
Remember, he got Steven Adams.
He did it in the previous round.
He got a lot of dudes. Draymond kicked Kyrie.
So he goes up the floor and gets tangled up with LeBron and kicks him in the midsection right in front of everybody's eyes.
Yes.
And something happened I thought I would never, ever see. The NBA suspended a starting player, a star, an all-star, for one of the two finals teams. Have you ever heard of that? I've never seen it happen.
Absolutely not. But we all know that they were desperate to get LeBron James a championship in Cleveland. That's why I always state LeBron has the most fugazi championships of any great player in the history of the sport. His championships are so fucking phony and fake. The first one he got during a lockout season in 2012. The second one he got because Ray Allen saved his legacy. The third one he got because he got one of the starters of the opposition suspended for a pivotal Game 5. And the fourth one he got in a damn pandemic. Like, when is this guy going to win a real championship in a real season? The closest that he's come this far was 2013 when Ray Allen saved his ass.
It's fine him, but you can't suspend him.
When they did who that came off the bench? Somebody came off the bench. Amari Stoudemire. They suspended him for the game. What was that, Game 7?
Against Sam.
Right, but that was a stone cold rule, Shannon Sharp, that you can't come off the bench to try to intervene or engage in an altercation. You have to stay on the bench. That's the old Greg Anthony rule.
Antonio, so it's not. It was
okay,
not
but that was a blatant breaking of a rule.
That's black and white. That was a blatant breaking of a rule. There was no interpretation there. For them to say we're going to suspend Draymond because he called LeBron the B word and he flailed or some silly shit like that, like, come on, man. You have to evaluate those type of situations. It's the finals. Like, knock it off.
Cannot leave the bench and step onto the floor.
Robert Horry did.
Okay, well, I'm just saying that was blatant. This was not blatant. This was a judgment call on Draymond.
Okay,
right?
So
there's no Draymond, and they go home for a Game 5 in which they're down their guts and glue guys.
Okay, what about Game 6?
What happened? Well, they won the game.
What about Game 6?
Well, that's back in...
Well, we know what happened in Game 6. In Game 6, the fix was in. If Stephen Curry sneezed, they gave him a foul. This guy was the MVP of the league, and he had 5 fouls with like 10 minutes left in the fourth quarter. It was obvious that the fix was in it, and the NBA was desperate to get it to a Game 7. Once again, that to me was not a real championship. It is what it is. Certain people might get upset by that, but anyone who watched the game could see that they were determined to make sure that the series got to a Game 7. And whatever happened there is what happened. Even Stephen Curry's wife said after the game that the game was fixed. I mean, as much of a bubblehead as she is, she figured that shit out.
Okay, what about Game 7?
Go crazy.
Okay, well, so what about the series before? Golden State was down 3-1 against Russ. And
I don't care because we're talking about this one right now.
Skip is not letting Shannon Sharpe distract him. In regards to the series where Golden State came back from down 3-1 against OKC, what happened there was, unfortunately for Kevin Durant, he played on a team that didn't have a real offensive system and whose point guard has absolutely no basketball IQ whatsoever. Russell Westbrook is like a Tasmanian devil. You let him destroy himself. All you have to do is show him different looks defensively, and OKC, they didn't have enough shooting. Once they boxed in Russell, and they were able to frustrate KD because every time he caught the ball, they made him very uncomfortable. And KD did not have a good games 5, 6, or 7. I'm not trying to absolve him. But Russell Westbrook was just horrific. And I think that more and more people are starting to see who he actually is as a player. He's not a great player. He's a great talent. He's a masterful and unbelievable athlete to watch. But as a basketball player, no.
Is the greatest ever.
No, I'm saying the one that you talk about, the Clippers against the Mavericks, is not top 5.
Okay, well, you're saying this is top 1, and I'm...
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Because it's never been done before.
Okay, but what happened in Game 7 back at Oracle? Well, it was not so much about what LeBron and Kyrie did, it's what Steph didn't do. Look how pathetic he was.
If we're going to do that, I can say, well, what about Luka's supporting cast? What didn't they do? If we're going to make it about what...
Right, but to Skip Bayless's point, you cannot evaluate Stephen Curry, 2-time MVP, and the only unanimous MVP in the history of the league, and what he didn't do, to what the supporting cast of Luka Doncic didn't do. A better correlation would have been if Luka didn't play well in Game 7, and then you could counter with that. But you can't compare like Finney-Smith and Hardaway Jr. to Stephen Curry. Stephen Curry was horrific. In Games 5 and 7, he was horrific. I mean, if he just shoots 50% in either one of those games, Golden State wins the series. And he's supposed to do that. That's his job. He's the MVP. He was supposed to finish the series. He failed. It's not Finney-Smith or Hardaway Jr. or anybody else's job to finish the series for Dallas. Now, Luka needs them to make some shots, but if they don't make any shots, nobody remembers that. If the MVP doesn't make shots, everybody remembers that, as they should.
Could we do that?
Okay, well, what about Steph's the MVP, though?
Right.
Thank you, sir.
You would expect Luka of this series, the Golden State.
But you told me Kawhi was the best player.
Okay, but no.
Right, but why do you keep trying to shift the conversation, bro? He's helping you understand that for the sake of the correlation between the Cleveland Golden State series and the Toronto Dallas series, Luka plays the role that Steph Curry played in that other series. That's all he's saying. Why are you trying to shift it over to Kawhi now? I have to wonder about Shannon Sharpe sometimes. Like, did he take too many blows to the head when he played in the NFL?
He was a 2-time MVP.
Right.
He was a back-to-back MVP.
And we came back and got it.
And in games 4, 5, and 6... I'm sorry, 5, 6, and 7. He was a complete show.
Yes.
In Game 7 at Oakland, you won 93-89, and it was more about what Golden State could not do because Steph, in the fourth quarter of that game, went 1 for 6, 1 of 5 from 3, and had the crucial turnover when he threw it behind his back into the 5th row.
But I tell you what, you guys have been involved in one of the great comebacks. It just happened to you last year. The Nuggets walking down 3.
Nobody cares about that damn bubble bullshit. Like, nobody's gonna remember what the hell happened there. Like, I don't even think that what occurred there should be considered a real part of the NBA canon or the NBA lexicon. Like, Donovan Mitchell had 57 points in a game in the bubble. I don't count that shit. That's like something that you see at one of those Rico Hines runs on YouTube or something. We know where the NBA players out there going in between the legs 500 times and pulling up for 3, and one guy has 59 points and the other guy has 57 points. I don't count that shit. What we're seeing in these playoffs is real.
That's why this was even greater.
No.
They were in a much deeper hole because of the home court.
But you told me
Thank you, sir. You actually understand basketball. You can't tell me that home court doesn't matter. Teams fight for home court for the entire regular season. Nobody wants to go to the opposition's home court in a pivotal Game 5 or Game 7. Nobody wants to do that. That's why you fight to have, more wins in the regular season than your opposition. That Black Lesbians Matter bubble tournament shit where everybody's playing in an empty arena and all they do is change uniform colors, that shit don't matter. That's not real.
matter.
What do you mean last year?
Last
Well,
year
it mattered now.
Because
you have to deal with the demons of last year.
the demons, huh?
Well, you just do. This was the most unlikely, impossible.
What about the demons LeBron had?
Yeah.
Them demons that he had to overcome.
Well, you had a bunch of demons.
Okay.
2011 demons, 2010 demons.
So that's why it's the number one. Then I'm glad you said that.
2014 demons.
And
Spurs to Game 6.
It looked like Shannon walked into a trap that he thought he was setting for Skip, but actually he was setting for his damn self. Because Skip would rattle off all of LeBron's shortcomings and his failures.
Demons. Yep, he had a lot of demons.
It's not better than the Rockets. Skip, what about the Rockets when they came back against the Clippers?
Mm-hmm.
We just talked about this the other day. They were up 3-1, and they lost game, got blown. They was up 19 in Game 6.
But so
That's up there. That's a good one to bring up. That actually is up there. I still would probably put this Clipper comeback ahead of that, but that's a great honorable mention.
series where it stayed on home court.
You got home court series. You had home court. You had Game 7 in your building.
I know, but they'd already lost 3 straight games at home.
Everybody's so
never happened before in the history of basketball. Never happened.
I can make a.
That's true. What occurred between the Clippers and the Mavericks, that was historic. That was the first time that in a 7-game series, the first 6 games were won by the visiting team.
Top 10 come from behind.
You know what? The more you talk, the worse it gets.
Not even.
I agree. The more Shannon speaks, the worse he looks. Like, he just looks like somebody who's desperate to make people believe that LeBron James should be viewed as this, the greatest comeback artist and all this other bullshit.
Top 10.
You could just see on circumstances, on history, this was the most unlikely comeback in history.
Because it's the first round. I'm giving you series that happened in the finals, Eastern Conference Finals, NBA Finals. At least get the semifinals.
Well, those are decent arguments, but at the end of the day, I think that Skip once again is just trying to associate or correlate the psychological aspect from what the Clippers have endured, not only as a franchise for 40 years, but also what happened last year in the bubble when that team had a massive psychological breakdown during a pandemic, something that no other team has ever had to deal with. So everything was just compounded. They had issues that no other team had because it was very obvious that most of their prominent players did not really want to be there.
Expect your Cavaliers in 2016 to come back?
Yes,
nobody.
I did.
Nobody.
Who came on your show and told you, said, "Come on, go with me"? I'm driving
and at the last second, when I pushed you, as we were going off the air, you switched your pick back to Golden State. That's what happened.
I believed.
No, you did not.
I believed.
You said you wanted Golden State.
Anything's possible.
No.
Who was at the parade?
Kevin Garnett.
Who was at the parade? Who was at the parade in 2016?
Photobombing LeBron. Unless you photoshopped yourself.
I was actually there being open at the parade.
Shannon would do some shit like that too. Photoshop himself into a bunch of LeBron photos. Be like, how the hell was Shannon Sharp at St. Mary, St. Michael with LeBron James at his high school graduation? You see Shannon Sharp face all up in the photo.
Yeah, this is not a top. This is not even close.
Yeah, this is the most amazing thing I've ever seen in all my years watching the NBA back to.
It's up there. I wouldn't put it number one necessarily, but Skip makes a very compelling argument. Look, we all know that Skip is just trying to find a reason to attack LeBron because he knows what's being implied here when he says that there's another team that had the best comeback ever. But I've never thought that Cleveland's comeback against Golden State was the best comeback ever. I never even thought that it was really a legitimate comeback because that Cleveland team had underperformed and underwhelmed throughout the regular season. They had the most talent of any team in the NBA by far. I mean, when you look at some of the role players on Golden State, they didn't even bring most of those guys back the next year because most of those guys wasn't even that damn good. Festus Ezeli and Maurice Spates. I mean, come on, man. What's the Brazilian Blur? And a lot of those guys had to go. They weren't even that good. Basically, the 2016 Warriors were a team that was about 2 or 3 years ahead of the rest of the league. And when the rest of the league caught up with the Golden State Warriors a couple of years later, you saw, they kind of came back down to earth a little bit. They still were a great team, but they had to add KD. KD was the most pivotal thing because they needed an ethereal level scorer who had mastered the mid-range. You cannot win championships unless you have a great mid-range scorer. And that's what they were missing in the 2016 finals, because Harrison Barnes could not hit the broadside of a barn.
76 when I covered the Lakers for the LA
Miami
Times.
coming back from 0-2 against Dallas, Skip, down 13 with 4 minutes left in the game.
Yeah.
To come back and win 4 straight.
That's a great comeback also. But, I mean, come on. Let's not go there. No, we need an FBI investigation into that series. But that's duly noted.
It's more impressive than this.
And by the way, speaking of the Lakers, I need to read the tweet that I tweeted immediately after the Clippers won Game 7 yesterday, because it pertains to your Lakers. If I could, if I could show this, please. Okay. For those who said the Clippers tanked to avoid playing the Lakers, avoid playing them at what? Golf?
The best thing that happened to the Lakers is that they did not get the Clippers in the first round. They would have got their doors blown off. And if the Clippers bring back this same team next year, they're going to beat the Lakers in every matchup in the regular season. And if they play them in the playoffs, they're going to beat them in 5 games.
Lawn bowling, checkers, enjoy your vacation, La Brick.
I noticed how you tweeted that.
Let me also say this. As I'm filming this video, Phoenix was up 2-0 against the Clippers. Chris Paul came back. I've already surmised that, in my view, there seems to be something afoot with him and the LA teams, where maybe the NBA League office has told him that we need one of the LA teams to get to the finals for ratings. Who knows? But, you know, he was the worst player on the floor in Game 3 against the Clippers. So it would not surprise me if Chris Paul finds his way onto the Lakers for next season. So I would love to see the Lakers with Chris Paul go up against the Clippers fully loaded with the same team that they have this year.
I needed you to tweet that when they were down 0-2. I needed you to tweet that when they were down 3-2.
So you were the primary perpetrator of this nonsense, this garbage that you spilled all over this table.
True.
That the Clippers actually tanked to try to avoid the Lakers. They didn't. If they wanted the Lakers, they wanted them first.
No, that was a part of the conspiracy led by the LeBron James fanboys in the media to once again psychologically attack the Clippers, because they're more infatuated with the Clippers than they are their own team. The Lakers were terrible throughout the regular season and into the playoffs, but, you know, the LeBron James fanboys call it an injury issue. The Clippers have shown nothing but heart and grit, and they sit back on television hoping for them to lose. That's why you can't call these guys media anymore. They're just fans in blazers.
The reason they did not play their stars down the stretch was what happened yesterday. Was Kawhi Leonard healthy yesterday? Was he looked like his gas tank was still full at the end of the game?
Utah Jazz, baby. Let's go, Jazz.
Yeah. I think they stuck it right to you.
Utah Jazz,
Again,
baby.
you tried to motivate the Mavericks as in they wanted you guys. They
did.
Yeah.
They did.
Show them.
They
And they showed them in the first 2 games.
I'm going to get me a Donovan Mitchell jersey.
Yep. Well, you're going to need it, because this series is going to be very different, because there's no Luka in this series. There's no Porzingis in this series. There's no Hardaway Jr. shooting threes from in Mesquite.
And as we know, the Clippers went on to defeat the Utah Jazz in 6 games. And, you know, pretty much it was easier than the series that they had against the Mavericks, because there wasn't that physical component that you dealt with Doncic. Doncic is so physical, man. He's a truly phenomenal player.
Utah the best three-point shooting team.
Yeah,
right?
I got it. I got it. But the best percentage three-point shooting team is this one.
And Donovan Mitchell, he might not be Luka, but he's plenty good enough.
He's plenty good enough. We'll see about that.
He's phenomenal, but what Utah really needs is a tall and rangy point guard. Like, if they had a Ben Simmons or someone like that running the point, and you could move Donovan over to shooting guard, which is his more appropriate and accurate position, he could lead the league in scoring. The way he can shoot at range and penetrate and explode over defenders when he's fully healthy, you know, he's an incredible talent. But Utah needs more. They need more athleticism on their squad. But it's very difficult for them to lure in free agents. Nobody wants to go play in Utah.
Have to also deal with the deepest.
Which is part of the reason I suspect that they brought in D. Wade. I think that they think that D. Wade can get involved in recruiting free agents.
Team in the West.
And also, of course, he'll be involved in trying to push his rainbow agenda in one of the most conservative regions, if not the most conservative region in the United States, that being Utah.
It seems like Utah's some bums.
Where are the Lakers now? Where's LeBron? On St. Kitts?
I mean, that's what happens when you have a short turnaround. See, y'all got extra rest.
More excuses. More excuses.
Y'all got put out in the second round.
Yep.
Got rest. So you were rested. You had an extra month.
Well,
that is fair.
Somebody's still playing at Staples. There's playoff fever at Staples. But it ain't Laker
all
fever.
I know is Lakers ain't have no cardboard cutouts. We don't have no cardboard cutouts in
yes,
our game.
you do. You have the very same crowd.
No, we don't.
You definitely have a couple of cardboard cutouts. The names of LeBron James and Anthony Davis. They stiff as hell when they're out there on the floor. I'm telling you, LeBron is almost done, man. I said this for a while now. He's almost done. You can look at it when he's out there on the floor. He don't know what the hell's going on half the time. He can't move or maneuver. And I saw it even before he hurt his ankle.
And nope.
Yep.
So remind me, Skip, you said Clippers in 6. Shannon's going Utah in 7. Is that where we're at? Has anything changed?
Nope.
Okay, so that's where we're at. All right, this is going to be very interesting.
As usual, Shannon ends up being incorrect. But anyway, I thought that this was a very interesting conversation. Do I think that Kawhi Leonard leading this comeback against the Dallas Mavericks was the quote-unquote greatest comeback of all time? No. But I do believe that it deserves honorable mention. It's certainly up there amongst any of the comebacks from down 2 games to nothing. It's probably the greatest 0-2 comeback ever, having lost the first 2 games at home. But as of right now, I'll probably say that the greatest comeback ever were those Rockets, when they came back from down 3-1 against Phoenix. So peace.